From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello, everyone. I'm Betsy Peterson, Director of the American Folklife Center here at the Library of Congress, and I want to welcome you to our latest presentation in the Benjamin Botkin Lecture Series. The Botkin series serves a dual purpose for the American Folklife Center. First of all, it allows us to present some of the best and most current scholarship in folklore, ethnomusicology, and oral history, and it also allows us to enrich our collections. We record all of these lectures, and they soon find their way onto our website and into our archives. So with that reminder of recording, if you have your cell phone on, please turn it off now. That would be most appreciated. Now, folklorists are seeing lately that there's an incredible revival of interest in folk tales. And this year actually marks the anniversary of, in fact, the 200th year anniversary of the Brothers Grimm household tales, or I'll try and butcher this, Kinder und Hausmärchen, something like that. But folk tales, of course, are older than the Grimms, but their publication in 1812 really captured the imagination of people at the dawn of the Romantic era. And through their work, folk tales such as Hansel and Gretel, Little Red Riding Hood, Snow White, and the Frog Prince, and many others, became part of the shared cultural heritage of all Western European and Northern Americans. And of course, Disney did quite a bit to further that. One of the most popular tales in this collection is Cinderella, the subject of today's Botkin lecture. But the traditional story, as I think we will find out, is much older, a bit darker, and a lot more complex than its recent portrayal over the last 50 years in modern media. Today, I have the honor of presenting Dr. Margaret Yoakum, one of the world's leading scholars of both folk tales and of the work of the Grimm brothers. She will introduce us to the real Cinderella today. Professor Yoakum is a dedicated and innovative teacher. She has been an active member of the English department of George Mason University since 1977, where over the years she has started the Folklore Studies program, which is now celebrating its 35th year anniversary this year. She has established in the English department a folklore, mythology, and literature concentration, the folklore and mythology minor, and she directs the Northern Virginia Folklife Archive. She holds graduate degrees from UMass Amherst in English and folklore and has done landmark research on numerous topics, including family folklore, craft and community in Western Maine, Eskimo heritage, feminist folklore, and folklore and creative writing. And it's just, I just want to, for a moment, say thank you to Dr. Yoakum for starting the Folklore Studies program. This is also an anniversary of sorts for Dr. Yoakum because this is the year that she is going to retire. And so we're very fortunate to have her this year. And I just want to say on behalf of the American Folklife Center staff, and I'm sure I speak for many colleagues in the Washington, D.C. area, we really thank her for her years of service and vision and creativity in starting the program at George Mason and for her work with the American Folklore Society. And we wish her all the best. But today we come back to the Grimm brothers and Cinderella. That's the work that we're going to highlight today. And so I just want to turn it over to Peggy and let her tell us about the Cinderella that no one knows. Dr. Yoakum.
Thank you so much, Betsy, and thanks to all my colleagues at the Library of Congress, the Smithsonian, You have helped make our folklore studies program possible. The internships, the summer work at the festival. Our program is alive and well because of your help. I thank Benjamin Botkin, who showed us the way. My George Mason colleagues, Deborah Latanzi-Schutica, Joy Fraser, who are here with our wonderful students. Thank you so much for coming. I'd like to thank my husband, John Slack, a geologist who's taken the day off to come. It's very, very sweet of him. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank my teachers, because we always stand on the shoulders of our teachers. Samuel Byard, Penn State University, and at the University of Massachusetts, Marie Campbell, Raina Green, and especially my teacher, my lifelong friend, George Carey of Tennant's Harbor. I don't feel strongly about any of these people, do I? So, yes. So think with me a little bit about when you first encountered fairy tales. This is my first book my parents bought me. Look familiar to anybody? Yeah. Cinderella is a lot of people's favorites, and it, along with a lot of other tales that we call fairy tales, have been rescripted so many times into films, novels, poems, movies, TV shows. These Cinderella stories we know well are usually the versions of the tales that major publishing houses and corporate filmmakers such as Disney have brought to us and edited. But what of the other Cinderella? Today I want to talk with you about Cinderella, the tale we think we know, the tale that few of us know at all, Cinderella's cousin, Alalalal, all kinds of fur. To begin with, like Betsy was saying, Disney gave us a Cinderella based on a version published by Frenchman Charles Perrault in 1697. Oh, it was a saucy, teasing version meant for the ears of aristocratic ladies and their daughters. Perrault's version and Disney's has the fairy godmother, the pumpkin-turned carriage, the clock striking midnight, the comic struggle to get feet into small shoes, the triumphal marriage, and forgiveness of one's stepsisters. What did Disney not use? He did not use the Brothers Grimm. Published 201 years ago, 1812, this one has a magic tree that seems like the soul of Cinderella's dead mother. This is the one where, in the end, there is absolutely no forgiveness. Cinderella's birds peck out her stepsister's eyes, one eye each before the wedding, the other eye after the wedding. By the beginning of the 20th century, Grimm's Tales for Children in the Home was second only to the Bible as a bestseller in Germany. The Grimm brothers, Jakob and Wilhelm, turned out 7 editions of the tales between 1812 and 1857, constantly adding and deleting stories. So by 1857, the tales held 210 stories, 54 more tales than in the 1812 edition. Now, the Grimms had their own editing practices. They upped the violence and they reduced the sex. In 1812, their Rapunzel, for example, well, the witch learns about the prince's visits when Rapunzel asks, "Oh, why has my dress become so tight?" In later versions, the Grimms remove this allusion to pregnancy. Rapunzel sounds careless, almost stupid, when she asks the witch, "Why are you so slow coming up the ladder when the prince is so quick?" Also, the Grimms de-emphasized magic. Also, they changed mothers into stepmothers. So Hansel and Gretel's mother becomes a stepmother in the 1819 edition. And finally, the Grimms shortened the speaking parts of their heroines and increased the roles of men in the tales. Today, when folklorists, like those of us who are working at the university or at Library of Congress, we make very few changes in the texts of the stories we collect. However, like other writers of their time who assembled collections of folktales, the Grimms freely edited the stories that they heard from the storytellers. Why? Well, just two brief examples. First, the tales appeared amidst the turbulence of the Napoleonic Wars and the French occupation of German principalities. The French presence really upset the Grimms, who were in favor of the unification of disparate German-speaking principalities. So with the tales, the Grimms worked to articulate what it meant to be German. Like others, they believed that the tales had been changed by the corrupting influences of progress and modernity. So they wanted to edit and thus restore the tales to their earlier beauty, to the authentic German roots. Also, the Grimms were creating a moral, educational manual for children, and they hoped to sell their collection to educated middle and upper class German-speaking citizens. So they knew they needed to change the tale's language to suit those sensibilities. Also, the Grimms were not wealthy. They hoped the books would support them financially. Where did the Grimms find these tales that have proven so alluring to us even today? The Grimms heard most of their tales from young women, educated members of the middle and aristocratic classes who had read the tales in books and who may have heard oral versions of them too. The Grimms put several sources together to make their final 1857 Cinderella. For example, they collected one version from a woman in the Elizabeth Hospital in Marburg, and her version was strongly influenced by that of Charles Perrault's French version. The Grimms also mixed in a version told to them by Dorothea Weyman, a major informant of theirs who gave them 34 other tales. She was the widow of a tailor, and like several other of their informants, Weyman was of mixed ethnic stock. Her mother was German, her father French Huguenot. So the Grimms, seeking to collect folk literature of the German soul, often relied on decidedly hybrid texts. And where did the women, such as Dorothea Weyman, get the oral tales they told? No one can say with absolute certainty where these marvelous tales come from. These are international wonder tales, Märchen, tales of some length with multiple episodes set in distant, unspecified time and place, filled with transformation, magical characters, and journeys. But based on the earliest known texts and the geographical distribution of those texts, many folklore scholars are willing to name Asia as a major source area for the tales, and trade routes as the methods of that distribution. We know from 19th and 20th century fieldwork, especially by folklorist Linda Degg in Europe, that tailors, tinkers, soldiers, and other travelers passed these stories along. The oldest Cinderella version that folklorists have been able to find comes from the 9th century, from 850 AD, in China, about Yeshen, complete with evil stepmother, shoes, and marriage, but it also includes a magic fish and more. As the tales traveled, they changed, of course, and the Cinderella story developed into two major variants, one about the stepmother's persecution of a young woman, the other about a father who wants to marry his daughter. The variant that world cultures emphasize is Cinderella, the one that demonizes the stepmother. And then there's Cinderella's cousin, the Cinderella who rarely appears in books of selected tales, the Cinderella a lot of people have never known. Alalarao, Donkey Skin, Catskin, Katie Woodencloak, Gelida, all kinds of fur. Here's her story as the Grimms tell it. A dying queen makes her husband promise to marry only a woman as beautiful as she is. Years later, the king declares his intent to marry his daughter. The daughter demands 3 dresses and a mantle made of a piece of fur from each of the animals in his kingdom, thinking her father will never find these items. But he does. She takes 3 of her treasured possessions, puts her 3 dresses in a nutshell, wraps herself in a mantle of rough furs, and runs into the forest. A king's hunters find her, name her Alalairau, and take her to the cook in the castle, where she works at dirty tasks for years. When the king holds 3 balls, she attends wearing gowns, then disappears and puts her fur mantle back on and returns to the kitchen. After each ball, the cook tells her to make the king's soup instead of sweeping the ashes. She puts her treasures one at a time into the soup bowl. Each time the king finds a gold object in his soup, he has her called before him and asks, "Who are you?" The 3rd time, the king sees on her finger the ring he slipped on the beautiful woman's hand when they danced in the 3rd ball. He opens her fur mantle, sees her star dress, declares her to be the beautiful woman at the ball, and marries her. Given the incest, you can perhaps understand that this story is left out of many anthologies and that few scholars have written about it. I've been drawn to this story, though, for a very long time. As I researched it, I saw that most Grimm scholars focused on the incest and on who the daughter eventually marries. Was it her father? Was it a second king? Regardless of what the Grimms intended, their 1857 text allows this ambiguity to flourish, and my students regularly disagree on just whom All Kinds of Fur marries. Myself, I think she marries a second younger king. But I delight in these ambiguities because they allow us as readers and listeners to hear multiple possibilities, undercurrents, scholar Maria Tatar calls them. These productive ambiguities engage us and allow us to find our own story within a fairy tale's text. My focus here, though, today is not on whom she marries, but on the heroine herself, on her journey through the gendered, sexually redolent landscape of the tale's provocative middle section. Framed by heterosexual marriage proposals, the Grimm's tale, along with the many versions known around the world, spends most of its time detailing that liminal middle ground. Here, the heroine dons gender-bending disguises and escapes her father or brother, wanders to places of intrigue and meets creatures both familiar and strange. Some see in Alalairau the story, as I do, an undercurrent that carries the experiences of incest survivors who move back and forth among different perceptions of themselves and their bodies as they journey toward renewed life. Another undercurrent of the tale explores the experiences of queer, transgendered, transsexual, and intersexed persons who find themselves too between bodies, and often hiding in their own bodies. And yet another undercurrent speaks to all of us who have ever felt encased in a strange skin, unable to live as the person we feel ourselves to be. It is not the marriage at the end of All Kinds of Fur, or Cinderella really, that draws people to this story. I would say that it is this journeying middle ground. Listen to these stories from across the world and consider Alalairau's journeys, her hidden bodies in this middle section. And to better discuss these versions, I've divided the tale into sections. First of all, first part of the story, in these international tales, a beautiful young woman's journey is set in motion by her father's or her brother's demand that she marry him. Usually the man falls suddenly, madly in love with her. Often her mother dies early, unexpectedly, after asking or requiring that the king marry no one else unless she can match the dead queen's beautiful body in some way. The candidate should fit into the same dresses, or shoes, or rings, or bear the same star on her forehead, or have the same gleaming gold or golden silver hair. No one else can be found. Or the daughter tries her mother's clothing or ring on by accident, and her father sees her. In Scotland, she shows her father how well her mother's dress fits. Among Romanians, her brother sees her combing her hair, and that's all it takes. Second, she stalls her pursuer by countering his incestuous demand with requests of her own, often for objects identified with the feminine gender or the female body, made of strikingly unusual materials. And in so doing, she acquires the wondrous items she will need for the challenges ahead. In Scotland, her mother, who is reincarnated as a little brown calf, advises her to ask for gowns and shoes and chests, gowns of swan's down, moorland kannach, or bog cotton. In Russia, she creates several dolls who help her. They split the earth open for her, and she escapes into a marvelous underground kingdom. Third, one item she gets before or during this journey is an unattractive skin or covering for her body. In this disguise, this second skin, she appears to others, sometimes male, sometimes female, sometimes a spirit world being, a thing, a living entity whose characteristics cannot be discerned. Sometimes, as in Palestine, she wraps herself in a tight-fitting sackcloth and appears to be a weird old man or a jinn. Sometimes, as in Sudan, she removes the skin from an old man and covers herself with it. Or has a carpenter fashion her a dress from the dawn palm. In Japan, she receives a frog skin. In Slavic countries, a mouse skin dress. In Norway, a wooden cloak or a crow skin cloak. In Russia, a hood made of pig skin. For Romanians, she turns herself into sea foam. Yeah. Fourth, given the multiple skins of her ambiguous body, she sometimes disgusts, but often intrigues those who see her. Making use of her many layers of identity, she answers their questions with riddles about bodies. They either bring her back to their castles right away or open their kitchen doors to her knock. In a Basque story, a king fishing in the mountains invites a furry woman riding on a donkey to be his kitchen maid as soon as he hears her quick, saucy answers to his questions. "What kind of creature are you?" he asks. "Are you an animal or are you a person?" She says, "Human am I and no animal. That handsome youth believe. Under this husk lies a kernel many young men would crave." In Egypt, when a slave girl sees what she thinks is a heap of skins with two bright eyes staring out, she says to her queen, "My lady, there is something monstrous crouching under our window. I have seen it, and it looks like nothing less than an Ifrit." When the queen sees Gelida, she comments on this astonishing creature and asks, "What is it? Who are you?" But the queen decides, we shall keep her to amuse us. Under the gaze of others, the girl becomes it, both monstrous and astonishing. Her body, like a riddle, gets read over and over again. Fifth, hidden behind her body disguise of rags, soot, animal skins, she works as a domestic servant, usually in the kitchen. In India, her face hidden behind a mask, her gold hair tied tight, she is an expert cook. especially of sweet rice. Sometimes, as in Egypt, she's recognized as a wounded creature and placed especially under the care of the cook. "Mistress Cook," the queen says, "take this broken-winged soul into your kitchen." In Sudan, the girl cares for pigeons, or sometimes geese. 6. After working for years, she begins to remove her unattractive skin at times. Dressing in beautiful clothes and jewelry made with unusual materials, she goes to one or several balls, or church services, wedding celebrations, horse races, or feasts. Then she puts her skin back on. She often hides her beautiful clothes in places associated with spirit world beings, in the mounds of the hidden people, the fairy people in Norway, or in an oak in Russia. 7th, during this time she interacts with a young man of high degree who falls madly in love with her. He tries to discover her identity by asking if she bears any relationship to the strange, ugly servant in his household. In an Afrikaans tale from South Africa, he searches for her when the ring he gave her appears in his soup. Finally, he follows the sound of wondrous harp playing to the dungeon, where he finds her dressed in cliff badger fur. Often she and the young man compete with each other through teasing riddles, contests, and games. Voyeurism and male-to-female cross-dressing happen here. In Sudan, he suggests that they play mungala, a game that resembles chess. Often, as in Italy, the young man watches the girl undress. In Palestine, he dresses as a woman so he can go with his mother to the woman-only dance and watch the beautiful unknown girl. Very often, the young man hurls personal items of his at the girl: his boots, his walking sticks, combs, handkerchiefs, towels. He loses most of the competitions. He cannot solve the riddle. He loses the race. He sees, but he doesn't understand the creature whose body he watches through the peephole. Lovesick, he often takes to his bed. 8th, during this time, she continues to work, often in the kitchen, while her co-workers and the cook play a very special role in her transformations. Usually they appreciate and protect her. In Russia, one of her fellow servants hides her by giving the Tsar's son a place name riddle instead of the true place where she lives. Finally, she puts aside, or has torn from her, her skin disguise for the last time. And even though she stands in glory, radiant in a dress of sun or diamonds, someone, usually the young man, asks the question that never disappears: "Who are you?" "Finally, I found you, love of my heart," the prince says in Sweden as he sees her in her diamond dress. "But who are you really?" The question invites her to tell her story, and in a powerful act of assertion and identity, she does so. In Italy, she gives a long, detailed report on what she went through, incest and all. In India, the young man's mother takes her to an inner chamber, asks questions, and listens to her strange story. The "who are you" question, however, suggests that even though she is about to be married to a royal man, she trails suspicion. This tale of the other Cinderella, of Alalai Rao, with all its versions, is one of immense scope. The undercurrents of its major middle section enables the story to speak to incest survivors, transgendered persons, and to any of us who have ever imagined that we are living, even hiding, in a strange skin. The story asks, what is it like to be human, to inhabit multiple skins? To see more of the tale's possibility, I want to invite you to turn with me briefly to two other issues. to translations of the tale, and to interpretations of several resonant objects in the tale. This work of mine on Allerlei Rauh deepened with German lessons that I started a number of years ago, and as part of my lessons with my university colleague, Dr. Irmgard Wagner, I wanted to translate Allerlei Rauh. I didn't know for sure what I would learn, but I set out. And one morning, working at my computer, I discovered something that totally surprised me. I'd always seen the word girl used in English translations to refer to all kinds of fur, but there was the German word Kind, child. The German word for girl, Mädchen, was not in the text. Not in Grimm's text. Using child and not girl makes a big difference because child shows Allerlei Rauh protecting herself. She uses this verbal strategy to unsex herself, to turn herself into a sexless, genderless child. This act of self-transformation through language takes on greater and greater significance as the tale proceeds. So in my translation, I use child here and not girl. A second issue of translation choice, influencing how we receive the tale of all kinds of fur, surrounds the word Königstochter, king's daughter. In the Grimm's early text, they used Jungfrau in this section, and princess everywhere else. French loanword. And then they shifted to Königstochter, king's daughter. Which to use, king's daughter or princess? When you translate, what kind of choice to make? Most translations use princess. What happens if you use king's daughter? I thought this was very important because using king's daughter intensifies several different ideas that are not available when you use princess. It reminds us of the perpetrator of incest, for example, emphasizes the relationship to the father who committed the incest. It makes the tale quite different. A third translation issue has to do with pronoun choice, and I'm just going to mention it here. But if you'd like to read more, my essay was just published along with other wonderful essays in the book Transgressive Tales, Queering the Grimms. Simply put, some places in the text where the Grimms could have used either the feminine or the neuter pronoun in German to refer to all kinds of fur, they use the neuter s. They make this choice, especially in sections when all kinds of fur wears her rough fur mantle. So I've put it in my translation, rather than the usual she, in those places to emphasize all kinds of fur's many transformations. It, she, it, she. In addition to this closer look at translation, I'd like to tell you about several objects in this tale. Objects we can easily overlook, thinking, oh, it's just a kitchen, oh, it's just a spinning wheel. But if we consider them to be resonant, symbolic objects, new perspectives on the tale open up to us. The kitchen is not just domestic space, it's a space of magic, transformation, and power, and so are the people who labor there. In mythology, medieval romances, and more, kitchens are sites of tricks, disguise, sanctuary, changing identity, and transformation not only of food but of people. In kitchens, people who have been wronged can right themselves. In the Nordic saga, Grimner's sayings, Valhalla's powerful cook Andrimnir oversees magical utensils and animals. And in his pot, he boils the boar Sahrimnir, who is eaten every night by the warrior heroes of Valhalla, and every day the boar comes to life again. In the late 13th and 14th century English romance, Havelok the Dane, the orphan prince escapes from his enemies and becomes helper to the cook of the Earl of Cornwall. Havelok performs many lowly tasks, carries water, strips of turf. The cook is so pleased that he feeds Havelok well and gives him new clothes. When Havelok takes off his only piece of clothing, a foul, coarse cloak, and puts on new, his beauty shines forth. Havelok wins a contest by moving a great stone, marries a princess, and rules both England and Denmark. And then there's Till Eulenspiegel. In print throughout German-speaking areas from the 16th century on, a poor, hungry young man fools those who abuse him. Often, Eulenspiegel presents himself to the gullible rich as a cook or a cook's helper. And the kitchen becomes a site for disguise and trickery as people of different genders and classes struggle for power and respect. Now, the dangers in a kitchen, especially a medieval kitchen, are clear. And Wendy Wall, a scholar of early kitchens, cookbooks, and medieval and Renaissance drama, suggests that instead of thinking tame when we see the word domestic, we should think of the aggressive energies circulating in the kitchen. The power of the cook in the kitchen, these aggressive energies, can easily be seen in recipes from England and Germany in the 1500s. I listened to a few, right? Take a red cock, pluck him live, slit him down the back, take out his entrails, cut him in quarters, bruise him in a mortar with his head, legs, heart, liver, gizzard, put him in an ordinary still with a pottle of sack. And from a 1553 German cookbook for roast chicken, afterwards when they are dead, take them and beat them like a partridge, eviscerate them, do not let them get wet with water or anything else, and lard them well, and stick them on a spit until the fat runs out. Cooks and their helpers were experts on carnage, on killing. This 1500s kitchen shows the racks and chains, implements that still whisper about the work and power of the kitchen cook and helpers. So the kitchen and the cook are uncanny, strange, knowing. The kitchen in Alalai Rao becomes a site of ritually charged power that emboldens all kinds of fur toward transformation, and the cook, a wise man or woman skilled in ritual, as well as all things culinary. If we can see new possibilities in the kitchen, we can do the same for the tiny gold objects that all kinds of fur puts in her kitchen soup. Certainly, as other scholars have written, the spinning wheel and reel show us that all kinds of fur is skilled in certain domestic tasks. But I have always thought that these objects suggest much, much more. And through my research, I've learned how spinning wheels and reels are very connected to farm villagers' courtship and sexuality in Germany, France, and elsewhere. In evening gatherings known as Spinnstube, German women would spin and sew, and later young men would come for food and for games, especially kissing games. And some of the games were games of magic, divination, designed to show which young man would marry which young woman. When the evening came to a close, a young man would walk home a girl he fancied, and he would carry her spinning wheel. In fact, the Spinnstube became so popular that many local officials became alarmed and tried to stop them. All kinds of immorality and fornication, one official shrieked. The evenings, though, continued. And when a couple married, the young woman often received a Hochzeitsspinnrad, a wedding spinning wheel. When a young woman married, for example, her friends or family would wind the finest flax onto a spinning wheel's distaff, her Brautrachen, and decorate the loaded distaff with ribbons of many colors. What can we say now about the tiny gold spinning wheel and the tiny gold reel that all kinds of fur puts in the soup for the king to see? Since the spinning wheel and the reel are so identified with sexuality, her use of them shows her to be a young woman announcing herself as ready for sexual encounter, worthy of marriage, to bring together what I've suggested so far about the tale. The middle section of the tale, with its powerful imagery of domestic spaces and domestic objects, emphasizes journey and transformation, and shows all kinds of fur to be an active heroine who takes a vital part in her own transformation. She devises the rough fur mantle. She hides her female self behind the word child. Emboldened by the life lessons of the kitchen and the cook, all kinds of fur begins to change her outer skin back and forth, between rough fur mantle and fine gowns. She hides herself. She reveals herself. She drops her gold ring, spinning wheel, and reel into the soup of the young king and announces her royalty, her readiness for courtship, sex, marriage. As is fitting for a victim of incest and abuse, it will take all kinds of fur time to become a queen and human again. And it will take the king just as long to recognize who she truly is and why he needs her. These new understandings show Alalai Rao to be a meditation on transformation. This immense story also puts before us multiple ethical dilemmas. What would we do if another behaved inappropriately toward us? What would we need to do to survive, to bring ourselves back to health? The tale dramatizes the choice that characters make and asks us to debate their choices. The story does not offer one moral or one sure path. It opens a door to debate, discussion, imagination. It is this open door of these international wonder tales that leads so many people to write stories and poems or make films that rewrite, revise, reinterpret the tales. And as I conclude this afternoon, I want to share with you my erasure poem of Alalai Rao, another way of looking at this tale. A word first about erasure poetry. It's a contemporary poetic practice where poets suggest a foundation text, erase or strike out or ghost out selected words, and create new poems. Just by looking at the covers of a few books of erasures, you can see the practice. Ronald Johnson's 2005 Radios, an erasure of Milton's Paradise Lost, offers his interpretation of the poem and its major themes. Janet Holmes' 2009 The Manuscript of My Kin, an erasure of the poems Emily Dickinson wrote during the Civil War years that focus our attention on war, past and present. Travis McDonald, in his 2008 O Mission Repo, Volume 1, a repo of the O Mission era attacks on the unit, takes the commission report on the 9/11 terrorist attacks on the United States as his source text, and among many other purposes, comments on the actions and language of contemporary politicians. With erasure, poets are constrained by their source text. How poets work the dialogue between the source text and the new poems. How, in other words, the source text haunts the new poem is one of the compelling challenges of erasure. Other challenges relate to the spacing of words and letters. You'll see some examples in my poem. My thanks to Kevin, who is helping me today, reading my translation of the Grimm's Alalai Rao. He'll read a section of the story, and then I'll read my erasure poem of that same section. We'll be presenting just the first third of the story and the poem. Kevin Stoy. In writing my erasure, Kinsfer, I've kept in mind that the Grimm brothers edited Alalai Rao and other stories that they often deleted, de-emphasized women's voices. And so as I write, I ask, what would all kinds of fur say if her words could rise? After our poetry reading, I look forward to talking with you.
Once there was a king who had a wife with golden hair, and she was so beautiful that no one like her existed anywhere on earth. It happened that she lay ill, and when she felt that she would soon die, she called the king and spoke. After my death, if you intend to wed again, take no one who is not just as beautiful as I am, and who has not such golden hair as I have. This you must promise me. After the king promised her this, she closed her eyes and died.
Oh, golden hair. My intent is a promise, close, here.
For a long time, the king could not be consoled, and he would not let himself even think about taking a second wife. Finally, his counselors spoke. It cannot be otherwise. The king must wed again, so that we will have a queen. Now, messengers were sent far and wide to find a bride whose beauty would match that of the dead queen completely. But in the entire world, there was no such a one to be found. And even if they had found one, there was certainly no one who had such golden hair. So the messengers returned home, their task unfulfilled.
For a long time, I could not, would not let, even think about his tell. But if they, oh, golden hair, tell.
Now the king had a daughter. She was just as beautiful as her dead mother, and also had such golden hair. Once, when she had grown up, the king looked at her and saw that she in every way was like his dead wife, and suddenly he felt an intense, hot-tempered love for her.
Daughter, mother, such golden hair, she, her, she, wife, me.
Then he spoke to his counselors. I shall marry my daughter because she is the very image of my dead wife, and because I can find no other bride who is her equal. When the counselors heard that, they suddenly became frightened and spoke. God has forbidden that a father should marry his daughter. From sin, nothing good can come, and the kingdom will be drawn with you into ruination.
I, a daughter, a dead wife, an other bride. Oh, come, kingdom, be drawn into ruin.
The daughter was even more frightened when she heard her father's decision, but she hoped she could yet turn him away from his plan. So she said to him, "Before I grant your wish, I must first have 3 dresses, one as golden as the sun, one as silver as the moon, and one as brilliant as the stars. Furthermore, I demand a mantle pieced together from 1,000 kinds of pelts and fur, and every animal in your kingdom must give a piece of its skin for it."
The night herder's maw opens. First, get a man piece, pelt, gut, skin.
But she thought, "Getting such a mantle is quite impossible. In this way, I will turn my father from his evil thoughts."
Turn, to earn, rut, turn, Run.
The king did not give up his idea, and the most skillful maidens in his kingdom had to weave the 3 dresses, one as golden as the sun, one as silver as the moon, and one as brilliant as the stars. And his hunters had to catch all the animals in the whole kingdom and cut off a piece of each one's skin. From that, a mantle of 1,000 kinds of fur was made.
His dun deer nears. Catch, cut, skin, hide.
Finally, when everything was finished, the king had the mantle brought to him. He spread it out in front of her and spoke, "Tomorrow shall be the wedding." Now, when the king's daughter saw that she could no longer hope to bring about a change of heart in her father, she made up her mind to flee.
All is red, all. Hind, hope. Hand. Go, go, oh, go, go, go. Moon and stars, a shell, fur and soot. Go. Walk nigh, Hecate. Call down a fell sleep and still. So, begin. It, ring around, skin game. Hide and seek. Touch a forsaken other. It, me, you, all kinds of. See, the ashes are cast. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Thanks again to Kevin Stoy. It would be fun to talk with you about anything that you'd like to. Yes.
You talked about the problems of translation, and the best-known version of Cinderella, the Perrault version, we know of the glass slipper, but that may be a mistranslation because there are several words there in French. V-E-R-E is glass, but there's also there, V-A-I-R, which is fur, which leads us back to all kinds of fur.
Yes, it's really interesting, isn't it? And the choices that we make as translators, as you point out, are key. And in doing this translation, first, to learn about the tale and working, with my German professor, just kept pulling layers and layers out of this story. And when I realized the shift in pronouns, and I thought, well, what other choices have translators made? And that's been, very exciting for me to learn about. And it reminds us how important learning other languages are for all of us as scholars, to go back to those original language texts, and if we can't do that translation work ourselves, to have someone work with us. It's been a revelation for me as I've continued my work in German. Yes.
I've always been curious about the role of the huntsman that always seems to pop up in these stories, the Little Red Riding Hood, Cinderella, etc., the Huntsman, Gretel. What was your take on that, and as far as the rest of the story?
Yes.
Just recap the question.
The question of the role of the huntsman, which is a really good question. Because the forest, the hunt, the animal, the hunters, all of this is a place in so many of the folk tales, and such an important one. For me, the hunters are really vital here, because they're the ones who come in contact with, this creature in transformation, with Alalai Rao. And they're the ones, who see it for the first time and have to decide what to do. I spent a lot of time translating their words, and thinking about what they were doing. What choices were they making as they took her back? Where were they putting her on the cart, Is she being laid gently or harshly? All of their actions are really key. They seem to take up a small room in the tale, but they're vital. They link the world of the king with this creature becoming. And they are the ones who live in the forest best, and they keep going back between forest and castle, forest and castle. They also name her in this story. It's the hunters who give her the name, Alalai Rao. And so one thinks, well, it seems teasing, it seems like a joke, all kinds of fur. But they are the ones who name her, and they are the ones who place her with the cook in the kitchen, which is absolutely key. So they're really, they seem like a small role, but they're vital. They're the transition point. Yeah, thanks for your question. Hi.
I was wondering if you could speak more about the skin changing. That seems to be a big theme through all of the different tales in the different countries you mentioned. Does that show that the heroine has power because she's closer to nature or closer to the spiritual world?
You're right. I just think that's one of the key places in the tale. That's a big and wonderful question. Remind me of the first part of your question. You went.
Do you think, what does that signify? Power or control?
I think it's one of those very, very rich emblems that has multiple parts. What was she thinking when she was trying to avoid marriage with her father? That she asked for this cloak of many skins, and she's asking for, a piece of fur to be jabbed, cut, bloodied, taken out of every single animal. Is she asking for the power of those animals to be placed next to her? So she's putting that together, and she moves out into the forest. Does she know what's going to happen to her? Absolutely not. So this is certainly a way to protect herself. But what's marvelous about it is to see how she uses it in different parts of the tale. And it's all in our imagination, of course. When I ask students to draw pictures of some of the scenes, like Alalai Rao when she first goes into the tree and hides and she's got the fur on, I love seeing whether people will draw her with the fur hood over her golden hair or not. How much of herself is she covering? That is completely open to our imaginations. And, you know, in my thinking of the story in the beginning in the kitchen, she's really covering herself up. But as the time goes on and her life experiences happen, she is able to take that skin off a little bit and a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And so it really is showing her becoming her own self and transforming. That skin is crucial. It's a powerful metaphor in so many stories. And I think that's one of the major things about Alalai Rao is teaching us about skin, about the skins we live in, and the skins we see in other places. Thank you for your question.
I'm struck by, I don't know these stories very well, but I'm struck by some really odd sort of catch-22s where the mother makes her husband make this promise, and yet in the story she appears as a helper, you know, a tree or a calf or something to help her daughter. Am I getting that right? And another place where she comes back to the kitchen and yet she keeps revealing herself by putting things in the soup. Why would you do that? Why would you keep revealing yourself? So I just think there are these, I don't even know what the question is, except I think it's so complicated.
Yes. It's wonderful. So yes, you're asking me about the mother, and let me head into it this way. First of all, let's see, how do I do this? I'm thinking here of the differences and similarities between Cinderella and Alalai Rao, of course. And one of the most important things is that in Cinderella, in the German version, she does go to the grave of her mother and asks for help. Yeah. And so you can sort of feel that in Alalai Rao, you know, the other story. But in Alalai Rao, I'm trying to refocus my attention on your question.
Yeah, I realize I've asked some complicated things and it's not really.
No, tell me the second half
Second
again.
one, I'm thinking that she's trying to hide and save herself, and yet she keeps revealing herself.
Right. I think that's really key to transformation. That, you know, how do you come out of incest? How do you come out of a former life into a new life? And this story of Alalai Rao shows us that slow and amazing process of moving out and moving back and moving out and moving back. Now, these objects that she has and she puts in the king's soup time after time after time, in many ways she's saying to him, come on here, you know, focus, understand who I am. In some versions, not the Grimm's version, but in some versions of the story, the young king and Alalai Rao were engaged to be married. Okay. And those gifts, those objects had been gifts he gave to her. Now that's not in the final version of the Grimm's tale. And so, I mean, you know, you can look at that and think, okay. But even without that, you know, this is this lovely process of her saying, this is me. Can you see it? You know, can we have this marriage and understanding? In some way, it's her testing of him each time. You know, here is this gold ring. How could this get in your soup unless I put it there? Can you see through my ugly coat of fur to who I am? You know, can you see me? And in some ways, we ask that of all our lovers, right? Can you see me? Are you seeing me? And I think that's you know, your question nicely, turns us to, I think, one of the vital places of this story. Yeah.
Can you give us more details about the 9th century Chinese version that you mentioned?
It is available online for you to read. It's just, you type in YEH-SIEN, and you can read the whole thing. Especially, there's a wonderful website by a German scholar who's also friendly to folklore. His name is D.L. Ashleman, and he has a marvelous website of electronic texts that you can trust. And you'll find that version and many other variants of Cinderella, and also of ATU 510A, and also of all kinds of fur, which is ATU 510B, in the wonderful indexes that we as folklorists use to learn about these tales and be in conversation with people all over the world. Yeah.
One more question.
Do you find the tales more interesting if there's a link to Christian mythos, or the ones which don't have a link with the Christian mythos?
Me personally, do I find the tales more interesting if they have a link to Christianity?
Because you have the aspect of the transformation at the Last Supper, at the Last Seder.
Yes. Well, I understand what you're asking me. I link the tales and mythological tales together and see what we as folklorists call motifs throughout all of them. So, yes, one of the powerful things about our discipline of folklore is the way it is truly international and truly local. And the tales are one of our best examples of this, so that we learn and tell our stories well in our home countries, in our hometown. But we know as we're talking that we have these variants all through the world. And the power of that vision is what draws so many of us to folklore studies. Yeah.
Right. I'm sorry, we don't have time for more. Perhaps Professor Yoakum will stay and take several more questions, but I want to thank you all for coming, and especially for Peggy Yoakum for coming. Let's give her a round of applause.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.